Dead by Daylight over the years has seen more than its fair share of changes over its very long lifespan. While some patches may be great, some turn out decent, and some are just straight up mind-boggling. But there are some that somehow manage to defy all logic. Patches and updates that completely baffle the entire community and unite them to tell behavior to stop what they're doing. In today's video, we will be looking at some of the most controversial changes this game has seen and what happened during those times. I won't be talking about stuff like perk changes or things like that which get changed update to update, but rather changes behavior made / wanted to make that would alter core mechanics of the game itself. So no, I won't be talking about things like Nurse, Dead Hard, Decisive Strike, anything like that. I will be talking about these things in order from things that didn't really matter overall to things that are just straight up baffling that anyone with more than 2 seconds of playing Dead by Daylight would even think, yeah, let's not do this. So starting off with one that didn't really matter overall is the UI and movement changes. A while ago, Dead by Daylight was really trying to become more modern, with many graphical updates coming to the game to make the game look more appealing for the new generations of consoles for the PS5 and Xbox Series X. The only thing that hasn't been touched yet was something that's been in the game since the beginning, and that was the UI and animations of the survivors. These two were untouched and always stayed the same since the beginning. However, Behavior wanted to give the UI a new coat of paint since everything else was changing, and a new UI would be better long term for the game. While now the UI is pretty good and shows off much more than it did before, being way more in-depth and helping out survivors much more, back then it really didn't do much. However, on the release of this new UI, it was a complete and utter travesty of a design. This is an actual graphic design is my passion moment. It was an objectively bad UI that was not ergonomic in the slightest, with everything being everywhere on screen. Generators were at the top, events were at the top right, your power was on the bottom left, and survivors were on the middle left. Compare that to the old UI where everything you needed to know that was important was in one place at the bottom left. Now, with the new UI, you had to look in between 2 to 3 different spots if you wanted to get a quick recap of what's going on. Needless to say, the community was outraged at this new UI and demanded the old one back. Looking back on it now, it really does show off how stubborn Behavior is with some of their other changes, and you will see what I mean by this. Even though the whole community did not like this objectively poorly designed HUD, Behavior still pushed it through to the live servers because they worked on it so hard. Question mark. Instead of giving it another week or two to cook and let the old UI stay for a few more weeks until a new, better UI was developed, they just dropped it on everyone and said, you'll learn to like it. And while yes, again, it was tweaked over time to become an actual good HUD like we have now, back then it still was just poorly designed. And yet, despite the community's disapproval and request to delay or change it, they just dropped it anyways because they wanted to. This was one of the many cases of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, paired with Behavior's very headstrong mentality of not going back on many of their changes. It's a bad combination. During this time though, Behavior was listening to survivors and killers, seeing what they wanted changed, and eventually it slowly got tweaked over time, parts removed, and now it's decent. And then eventually later on, we get the solo queue buff of being able to see other survivors' actions, which is very good. I like it now. However, this was only one half of the issues at the time, and the other half of it being the survivors' new movement animations as they were completely remade. This one I genuinely never really saw as an issue because the core gameplay mechanics stayed the same and it was just a few things that changed like running, injured animations, stuff like that. Yet a part of the community just didn't like these changes at all because again, the animations were completely fine, but Behavior wanted things to be more modern and new and shiny, so they had to be updated along with everything else. These new movement animations apparently mess with some of the text and movement tricks like moonwalking, but I mean, none of that is really an issue. Hell, even after all of that, survivors still learned to adapt and how to do those tricks all over again. Even with the new animation changes that they complained about a bunch, it really didn't amount to anything in the end, and now everyone's just used to the new animations. Now, while those animations really didn't do much to the game as a whole, these next changes proved to be detrimental to the game and actively had negative consequences for the game as a whole. Next up, let's talk about one of the most infamous and short-lived changes to the game. While this patch was only in-game for about 4 days, those were 4 days of pure infamy. This was patch 1.9.2. What was so controversial in this patch, you may ask? Well, many of you may not know this because this was a 2018 patch. God damn, I feel old. So as we know now, a pallet or flashlight save for another survivor is a time-sensitive, high-risk, high-reward action. It takes a lot of knowledge and skill to perform it properly. You need to time the stun or blind not too early and not too late. If you blind too early or drop a pallet too early, it amounts to nothing and you've lost resources. Do it too late and the killer can move away from the pallet or look away and deny the save. It is one of the rare knowledge and skill checks in the game that actually shows the survivor's practice of the technique. especially with something like a flashbang or firecracker, which are even more precise to do. So now, what if I told you that you could get it guaranteed no matter what? You'd say I'm insane, right? Well, about that. In this patch, they made it so that no matter when you did it during the animation, as soon as the animation ended, the survivor would instantly be dropped. Yeah, all of the risk and reward needed to save a survivor was completely gone. You either push a button to drop a pallet or hold down a button and boom, you instantly save them. For one whole patch, they completely removed the risk and reward of the save and just made it so that you were already stunned. Luckily, however, this is one of the quickest reverts in the game's history, lasting a whole 4 days before the 1.9.2b dropped reverting this change. This is still one of the most questionable changes the game has ever made, but this was made during the game's infancy. I mean, it was 2018. People would hide and run when they missed a skill check and would manage to die in loops when they could literally instant transmission around a loop. So obviously, this change was made to appeal to the casual audience who play this game not too often so that they could save their friends much more reliably and much easier. However, for the rest of the audience who plays the game often, this made picking up a survivor in an open area / under a pallet literally impossible since there was nothing you could do to safely do it. Normally now, when a pallet save happens, there's a few frames where the killer can attack and hopefully get a hit on the survivor, at least trading for an injure state. But since the stun animation instantly played, during this patch that meant that all the survivor had to do was run in, push a button, and run out and they were completely safe. No risk, all reward. You can see why this patch lasted a total of only 4 days. While that flashlight save somehow managed to be repelled and saved us all from a hell of guaranteed saves, there is still one more threat out there. One that genuinely still threatens the entirety of the game forever. One change that could ruin many killer kits and buff many others. This change being the finishing Mori. This is one of the rare times where behavior made something and let us test it first before they dropped it on us forever. And just from this one PTB alone, it made the entirety of the community panic, as this PTB could decide how the game is played for a majority of the cast of killers, and I'm not kidding. The 6.3.0 PTB shows up, bringing in another huge gameplay change on par with the endgame collapse, a new gameplay element that can shift how Dead by Daylight is played forever. So, how does the finishing Mori work? Well, when all survivors are down, the game is instantly ended and a Mori is played on the final down survivor, instantly ending the match. And along with that, all survivors can now pick themselves up from the down state after 45 seconds, a time that could be further reduced through perks. So you might be saying, why is this such a huge issue I'm making it out to be? Well, let me explain. When all survivors are down in a typical match, it's still not over, as there are many things that can happen, like Unbreakable, Adrenaline, or Deliverance, killers not being able to find a close enough hook, survivors bleeding out, or finding a hatch. So now, with this one update, all of those possibilities are stripped away and removed in favor of the game instantly being over and deemed a killer victory. Along with that, if the final survivor is down, it also strips away the entire ability to give the final survivor hatch because you respected their skill or something like that, or you just want to be nice. This ultimately stripped away a lot of killer freedom and a lot of gameplay elements, and could even hypothetically buff a lot of the top tier killers. See, all of the survivors just have to be downed, not hooked. This meant that killers who can quickly chain hits together or instant down could hypothetically end the game in just mere moments. Killers like Nurse, Blight, Spirit, Oni, Cannibal, and many more. These killers just needed to down all 4 survivors in just a few seconds to instantly end the match. This is why it was such a huge issue, giving the strongest killers in the game an even quicker, literal instant win if, say, a Spirit manages to find the final 2 survivors that are injured, or an Infectious Fright only getting 4 chain downs. You can see why this was so scary for the game. There wouldn't even be a chance of something like flip-flop power struggle, since the killer wouldn't even need to pick you up, or even needed to hook you, just boom, everyone's dead. But again, that's not all. In this PTB, they also tried to implement their anti-slugging mechanic, which was just every survivor could automatically pick themselves after 45 seconds. This heavily, and I mean heavily, nerfs many killer kits, most importantly, the twins. They don't deserve this. Twins were already an easy killer to counter at the time with the rampant easy healing meta that survivors had access to. Killers who relied on getting quick downs with their huge power spikes were heavily nerfed by a new core mechanic. Killers like Twins, Cannibal, Oni, Plague, and Myers could no longer chain multiple downs, because if they do, after the second or third down, the first survivor would pick themselves up, so it would be a waste of time for the killer to continue using their power. And it was also a waste of time for the killers too, since one's on his timer like Oni's Blood Fury, Myers Tier 3, and Plague's Corrupt Purge, going to pick up and carry a survivor and hook them could waste up to about 20 seconds. And then you would have to run and find your next survivor, and at that point your power would have run out, With Unbreakable 2, this was only 20 seconds. You would have 20 seconds to pick up a survivor before they pick themselves up for free the entire game, not just once. Paired with something like Soul Guard, this made it so that survivors could pick themselves up almost instantly and gave them endurance. This made it so that killers had only one option for pressure when downing a survivor, and that was to instantly get them on a hook ASAP, or risk them getting up instantly and sprint bursting or dead harding away. Again, we got lucky this time, since it was just a PTB to test how it was received and see what needed to be changed. Unlike the next two changes in this video, this one we at least had a chance to repel, but sadly, this change isn't gone. This will come back in a new form and we don't know how it will be. These last two things were at least put in the game and gone as soon as they showed up. But what about something that was put in the game for no reason and forced upon us forever? But instead of it being for the greater good like a UI or new gameplay elements, this one was just for the worse and changed the game forever. The first one I'll be talking about is the infamous, depressing, and downright confusing Hillbilly rework. This one I'm sure many of you all know and loathe, when behavior for no good reason decided to ultimately execute the Hillbilly's power, just for no reason. Patch 4.1.0 drops, and it was primarily a chapter about the Leatherface's rework, making him more stronger and more consistent. An overall pretty good rework slash tweak for him, but there was sadly a casualty in this patch. For Bubba to get this buff, the law of equivalent exchange must happen, and someone must be reworked into being horrible. And this sadly went to Leatherface's biggest fan, the Hillbilly. In this patch, they made it so that using Hillbilly's chainsaw too long causes it to overheat, becoming unusable for a set amount of time. My tinfoil hat theory for this change is that they were originally thinking that they were tweaking Bubba's chainsaw, but halfway through realized it was actually Hillbilly's chainsaw, then in typical behavior fashion they just decided to go with it because they spent so long working on it. To say at the very least, this change was and still is horrible. To this day, it is still probably the worst rework in Dead by Daylight's history. Hillbilly for the longest time was known as one of the best and hardest killers to play, rivaling even the nurse because of how much patience you needed to play for Hillbilly, and learning how to curve and what loops you can and can't use your power on, etc. He had a simple power on the surface with a low skill floor so anyone could play him, however a good Hillbilly was a force to be reckoned with. A good Hillbilly would rev their chainsaw for ages and hit you with the most insane cracked out chainsaw sprint drift you've ever seen, and you just be in awe wondering how they did that, and it was so amazing. However, for no reason, behavior just decides to handicap his biggest strength, and that was his mind game potential at a loop and patiently being able to hit a sick down. To say this ruined Billy is an understatement. Billy went from S tier, one of the best in the game that heavily rewarded the skilled players who put their time and effort into learning this killer, into someone where you can use your power for 5 seconds and then you're shut out of it. They have recently tried to fix Hillbilly to make his chainsaw less punishing to use and easier to manage over time, however the damage has already been done. This change is the equivalent if they made it so that Huntress's arm gets tired if she holds a hatchet too long, or made it so that Ghostface's legs get tired if he crouch walks too long. The point is that this was a dumb change to a perfectly balanced and highly respected killer that sadly gets nerfed for no reason. However, this next change is very controversial, and that's that you haven't hit that subscribe button. I'm pretty sure I saw a lot of drama around this, but luckily, unlike the Hillbilly rework, you can change this by simply hitting that subscribe button and making everyone happy. But now, on a serious note, this is truly the most controversial and worst change Dead by Daylight has ever seen. A change that permanently changed Dead by Daylight's image and mentality forever. A change that could not be argued against because behavior spent too long in the lab with it, despite the community's constant disapproval. This is the change I'm sure many of you know and love. That is MMR. I already have a video talking about how bad it is and why it just straight up doesn't work, but I haven't talked about what happened during it. See, MMR was something behavior was trying to push for a long time, having a couple of PTBs testing out their new matchmaking. I believe it was about 3 or 4 test runs, and each of them had many issues, with the matchmaking still being just as bad or somehow even worse. I am one of the believers that MMR was something not needed in Dead by Daylight, as the old matchmaking was casual enough for a casual game like this, instead of it being MMR, which is a matchmaking system specifically designed for ranked mode or high skill games. MMR is used in basically every game with a ranked mode as a way to properly match players with players near their skill level, which is a good thing for something like a MOBA or a shooter, but Dead by Daylight is supposed to be a casual game, not a ranked game like that. Dead by Daylight is more of a game where you play a few matches with your buds late at night, not like I would know anything like that. MMR was shoved upon the game even though nobody wanted or asked for this change. Instead, we just wanted the old matchmaking to work better, as it was a good foundation. The old matchmaking pips worked that as you did more in a match, doing gens, healing and unhooking, being in a chase and escaping, to now just being up or down depending on if you lived or not, and vice versa for the killers. Back then, the only issue with the system was that if the killer tunneled or camped, you couldn't really get some objectives, like chase or altruism. Since they were always chasing that one survivor, it means that you couldn't really heal anyone or be chased by that killer because they were tunneling or camping. There were many ways suggested by the community to fix this change, but instead of behavior wanting to fix that, they decided to gut it entirely and give us MMR. I still don't understand why we got MMR, because this is not a game where people really needed to worry about losing points, considering the environment Dead by Daylight is already in. Along with that, MMR is still shrouded in total mystery, and the only way we have info on how it works is through people hacking the game and data mining it to see how it works. Saying that this is a stupid decision is, to say at the very least, brain dead and completely idiotic. There should be no reason why you replace a perfectly good system just to introduce a new one where you don't even explain how the points work or even what your MMR is. Dead by Daylight is still the only game I've ever seen to this day have MMR that doesn't even show you it. Honestly, it is straight up disrespectful to do something like this and not even allow the people who care about it to see it, because they're worried about the casual audience, which would be upset with their MMR points. Even though MMR is specifically designed for the people who play often and it's not for a casual audience. If Dead by Daylight had a ranked mode split, then I could see it working. But no, they stick everyone together into one queue, which is something I talked about in my video. By putting everyone together, you'd mix the sweat squad, solo queue, survivors friend teams just playing for fun, against the tryhard alchemist ring blight or nurse with 3 blinks, or mother-daughter ring spirit. It just doesn't work. While the other issues have been dealt with or at least changed somewhat, like the UI being updated or Hillbilly getting some buffs, MMR is here to stay, and I doubt Behavior are looking to change it at all, despite the community's constant disapproval of it, saying how unfun it is and how it's ruined the game post-release. So with that, I'll end it here. I really didn't want to talk about stuff like Decisive Strike or Dead Hard, since again, those are just perks that can be changed from patch to patch, versus something like a killer getting completely reworked and gutted like the Hillbilly, changing him and ruining him forever. There were definitely some other big things I missed, but these are the biggest ones I can remember, especially playing on the new UI and how it looked and how bad it was and the new animations. Hopefully, the feedback from the finishing Mori will be heard and made into a decent mechanic and put into the game as a good state, unlike MMR, which was just dropped on us. But it honestly depends how much work they're putting into the finishing Mori, because the longer time they put into it, the less they'll listen and the more they'll just want to drop it on us. So with that, I'm calling it here. I have a Twitter if you want to follow that or not, I'm not really sure, and again, I'm sorry for the 100th time that I haven't been uploading, I'm so sorry. But I hope you all have a fantastic day or evening, take care of yourselves, and have a damn good one. Peace out.